Good evening, I'm Jim Lara. On the NewsHour tonight, we look at the ups and downs and other changes at the stock markets. Kwame Holman profiles Dennis Hastert, the Speaker of the House. Mark Shields and Paul Gigot analyze the week of politics. Elizabeth Farnsworth interviews the winner of the Templeton Prize for Religion. And essayist Roger Rosenblatt talks of human nature. It all follows our summary of the news this Friday.
Brought to you in part by ADM. Feeding the world is the biggest challenge of the new century, because by the time this baby is old enough to vote, the world will have nearly 2 billion new mouths to feed. ADM, supermarket to the world.
This program is made possible in part by a grant from Travelers Insurance.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
Some new economic numbers helped turn Wall Street around today. The Commerce Department reported consumer spending was up last month, while saving was at the lowest rate on record. Some economists said consumers were pulling out savings to buy stocks in order to profit from rising prices. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrial Average closed up 92 points at 10,559. Yesterday, it had its worst session of 1999, losing more than 200 points. And the NASDAQ rebounded also. It was up 51 points at 2470. We'll have more on the markets right after this news summary. In Belgrade today, Russia's special Kosovo envoy presented Yugoslav President Milosevic with a peace plan. Viktor Chernomyrdin offered no details of his proposal, but Russian news reports said it called for a mix of NATO and Serbian peacekeepers in Kosovo. Allied airstrikes continued amid the diplomacy. They were the heaviest yet. Tom Bearden again has our summary report.
Belgrade and most of Yugoslavia were without electricity last night as NATO again attacked the nation's power grid. 2 major relay stations were destroyed. The strikes cut off power to one of the biggest hospital complexes in the city, which staffers said had been damaged in an earlier raid.
These buildings remained, and we try to maintain our patience as well as we can. But as you can see, almost the whole day we are out of electricity.
Russia's Balkans envoy, Viktor Chernomyrdin, arrived in the darkened capital for a 4th round of talks with Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic. Chernomyrdin said yesterday's indictment of Milosevic by a UN tribunal for war crimes had complicated his mission. In Brussels, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Strobe Talbot said the Russians were not negotiating for NATO and said the indictment was not a barrier to peace.
I think that the indictment, in a very real sense, vindicates one of the premises, not just of U.S. policy, but of the policy of our allies as well.
At the State Department this afternoon, spokesman James Rubin showed reporters a series of photographs he said showed that Serbs had dug up mass graves and reburied the bodies in individual graves.
We believe the motive for Serb forces undertaking this activity is to try to cover up evidence of their war crimes, confuse the picture, and obstruct the work of war crimes investigators.
The flow of refugees into Albania has resumed. UN relief agencies are worried that Albanian military exercises along the border might draw artillery fire from Serbian forces, with disastrous consequences for the overcrowded refugee camps nearby. An estimated 600,000 ethnic Albanians remain inside Kosovo, and international aid groups said it would begin airdrops of food and other supplies next week. NATO said it would cooperate, but warned the missions would be dangerous.
In another part of the world, an Indian helicopter gunship was shot down today over Kashmir, the disputed region between India and Pakistan. All 4 crewmen were killed. Pakistan denied any involvement. It followed a 3rd day of airstrikes by India against alleged Pakistani-backed separatists. In Pakistan, the state-run television ran footage of a captured Indian pilot and wreckage from one of the 2 jets it claimed to have shot down yesterday. In Washington, State Department spokesman Rubin urged restraint by both nations.
We understand that there have been a number of conversations between Prime Ministers Vajpayee and Sharif. We believe that Indian and Pakistani military and political leaders need to be in touch so there is no misunderstandings and miscalculations. We think they should support bilateral diplomatic efforts to pull their countries back from the danger of a heightened and far more dangerous conflict.
Rubin also said North Korea did not appear to be violating a 5-year nuclear agreement. He said American inspectors found an empty tunnel where they had suspected nuclear research was being conducted. Special Envoy William Perry left North Korea today after a 4-day official visit. He delivered a letter from President Clinton to the President of North Korea suggesting ways to normalize relations. China's ambassador to the U.S. criticized Congress today over the nuclear spying charges. He said it was trying to whip up fear with the report on Chinese espionage released earlier this week. Ambassador Li Xiaoxing said it was vicious and irresponsible. He repeated China's claims that it did not steal any U.S. nuclear secrets. He spoke at a news conference in Washington.
This kind of hysteria has harmed the valuable and very much cherished relationship between our two great countries, a relationship which is mutually beneficial and which is also good for maintaining world peace and for encouraging common development the world over.
And in Italy today, Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper was back on public view in Milan, cleaned and brightened by a 22-year restoration project. This is what it looked like before, covered by 5 centuries of dirt and paint from 9 other efforts to restore it. Leonardo completed it in 1498. And here's what it looks like now. Experts scraped it down to the original and touched it up with watercolor. And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to the markets, the speaker, Shields and Gigot, the Templeton Prize winner, and a Roger Rosenblatt essay. Wall Street took quite a ride this week. Monday, the Dow Jones Industrial Average closed down 174 points. Tuesday, another 124. Then Wednesday, up 171. Thursday, down 235. And today, back up 93. And there was the additional news that the NASDAQ market will have an evening stock trading session, the first move toward what could become a 24-hour trading day. To help us sort through this, Gretchen Morgensen, who covers Wall Street for the New York Times. Gretchen, welcome.
Thank you, Jim.
Up, down, up,
all
down,
around?
All around. What's going on?
Well, first of all, you have to remember we're at very high levels on the Dow. When we're in the 10,000, 11,000 area, 100 points, 200 points is not as large as it may seem if we were down in the 5,000 area. But we are seeing a lot of volatility, a lot of moves, and it is disconcerting to investors. However, the Dow Jones is still up 15% for the year, which is a sizable gain.
So when it goes up and down, the end result is still very much up. Is that correct?
It has been, yes. We hope it will continue, of course. The NASDAQ has had even more volatility because it consists of a lot of untried, untested, smaller technology companies whose fortunes are a little bit more unpredictable than the big blue chip companies that make up the Dow Jones Industrials.
But the point you made a while ago, I mean, and before it got into the 10,000, almost 11,000 range, 100 points or 200 points was either whether it was up or down was considered a huge deal, but it's not as big anymore, percentage-wise, right?
That's right, and that's the way you have to look at it. But I think that investors are concerned when they see these kinds of moves, and Thursday's move down of 235 points, as you pointed out, was the biggest point move down for the year. I think it reflects, Jim, a very deep concern about interest rates. That is really what's driving the market's uncertainty here. And we have had, ever since the crisis last fall, the world crisis in emerging markets, we've had a very accommodative Federal Reserve policy. They've been easing rates, as a matter of fact, 3 times in, I think, 2 months last fall. Now we hear in the last meeting that there is a concern that inflation may be around the corner, at least some signs of it, some straws in the wind. So we have a Fed that has changed its bias, is the word everyone uses, from accommodative to possibly more restrictive. And if interest rates go up, that's bad for stocks.
Yeah. And why is that bad for stocks? Make the connection.
It's bad for stocks because companies borrow money to fund their operations, and as interest rates rise, their borrowing costs rise. Anything that cuts into profitability, like an increased borrowing cost, means earnings will be down. But furthermore, it impacts stock prices because investors who see higher yields on bonds think to themselves, wow, maybe I should take a little bit of money off the stock market table and put it into a slightly more conservative investment that is yielding more than it was, say, last month or the month before.
Right, now let's go back also to explain to those who don't watch this every day, follow this every day. The Federal Reserve in its last meeting did not actually raise interest rates.
No, it did not.
But it, for the first time, said, hey, look, we're thinking about it, essentially. Is that right?
Correct. They were looking at things that made them concerned that there may be some inflation coming down the pike. And so they don't want to wait until it smacks them in the face to do something. So what they're basically warning is that they're on the lookout for it, they're alert for it, vigilant, and they're going to act if they feel it's necessary. Prior to that meeting, it had been, as I said, very much the opposite.
Yeah. To the people, the professionals on Wall Street that you talk to regularly, are they now just accepting the fact that this market is a, quote, volatile market? We're just going to have these ups and downs, and that's just part of doing business?
Yes, they are, unfortunately. I don't know what you do about it. We have had very high gains in the market for the past 3 years. But in addition to those gains, we've also seen this increase in volatility. But I'll tell you, people seem to be riding with it because you've got more investors in the market than ever before.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the NASDAQ market, and,
yes.
And that's driven by the incredible interest in anything that has to do with the Internet, right?
Well, a lot of the Internet stocks are front and center with investors right now. Of course, the NASDAQ is, I think, 5,500 companies, so there are plenty of companies sure. on that market that have nothing to do with the Internet. But the Internet has taken the fancy of investors to such a degree that that is, yes, what most people talk about when they talk about NASDAQ.
Now, do they also talk about, when they talk about Internet stocks, do they talk about it as something permanent, or do they talk about it as, oh, this is something you got to get on quickly because it may fade? I mean, what do they think about it?
You know, Jim, the interesting analogy that people say, the Internet is where radio was in the 1920s.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it was one of those events, and they don't come around very often. This is why people are so entranced with the Internet, is that it is an industry that has potential that people cannot even measure. And what that means is it's going to change the way the world works, change the way everything works, and so you can't even measure what it might do for businesses. This is what begins to explain the valuations of these stocks that are at tulip bulb mania levels. Because
tulip bulb mania? What does that mean?
Well, that one of the biggest manias of all time in the financial markets was tulip bulb mania in Holland in the 1600s, I believe it was, when tulip bulbs were selling for more than houses.
Oh, my God.
Anyway, it's one of the manias that people point to. Internet mania has been a mania because people believe it is going to change the way we do things. And with that in mind, they say, well, the sky's the limit about what these stocks should trade at.
And those are stocks like eBay, which is the auction internet service, and Amazon.com,
AOL,
exactly. Anything having to do with this goes up and down quickly. Now, on speaking of NASDAQ, they announced yesterday that they're going to have evening trading sessions. Why did they do that?
I'll tell you, it's a couple of reasons, I believe, Jim. One is that the world, it's becoming a more globalized investment arena. We are going to have markets that trade 24 hours a day. In fact, right now, you can pretty much trade a lot of stocks 24 hours a day, whether it's in Europe, Japan, a lot of the companies on the big board. You can trade these all night long. So I think that a lot of these markets, like NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange, has also mentioned that they are going to try this evening hours. They're doing it out of a defensive posture to try to maintain market share, as it were. They want people to be trading on their venue.
Rather than to go here again on the Internet, right?
Or overseas, for that matter.
Sure.
The other thing I believe that's fueling it is that there are so many people who trade on the Internet who don't trade during the day but come home, analyze their investments on their computer, and then want to make a change, want to make a buy or a sell, that they believe they should have access to these markets when they want to buy and sell.
Sure.
And so it's all, again, part of the internet having an impact on the way people think. And these marketplaces want to be able to give these people access if they want to trade.
Is there any informed wisdom on what impact a 24-hour market or even a beginning step like an evening market would have on stock prices and the markets generally?
Well, back to where we started, unfortunately, which is volatility. I think initially when you have evening marketplace, you're going to have far fewer investors in it. You're not going to have probably the institutions that buy and sell all day long, the mutual fund companies, the pension funds. You will have small individuals who, as I say, come home from work and want to trade. That means that they will have a far smaller pool of investors to choose from, to trade with. That will increase volatility, make it more difficult for you to get in and out of your stocks at prices that do not move the market.
Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it's not a good thing initially because it increases your costs. I think that will be a factor. Any kind of a new switch like this, I think that will be a result. But I think, you know, it's inevitable to a degree, and I think that we just have to make sure that we have the infrastructure, the systems in place to make sure there aren't breakdowns, to make sure that there is a paper trail, to make sure that everyone's transactions are effected efficiently.
Okay. All right. Do you agree that this is going to eventually result in a universal 24-hour stock trading system?
It very well could. I don't believe that I think a lot of Americans want to trade stocks at 3 in the morning, but maybe 5 do, and maybe 5 should be allowed to do so. You know, it's the old traditional marketplace is really breaking down here, and I think that's interesting and it's inevitable. So you might as well not fight it, might as well join it, let it happen.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Who is the Speaker of the House and how is he doing? Kwame Holman has the many answers.
A group of leading Republican women met early this month in Washington and cheered enthusiastically for the Speaker of the House, the former Speaker.
We miss him a lot, and I hope you'll give a great welcome to our friend Newt Gingrich.
In his first major speech since resigning as House Speaker last fall, Newt Gingrich roundly attacked President Clinton and the Democrats and said a few words about the man who replaced him as Speaker, Dennis Hastert of Illinois.
It's a tough, tough job, and my heart goes out to Denny Hastert. He's a great American, and I think as he learns the job, he's going to do better and better, and you're going to be very proud by next year.
Such qualified praise of the new House Speaker is common even among Republicans, and when Dennis Hastert went before the same group a few hours later, the response was more subdued.
Well, I'll tell you, that was a very kind introduction. I probably ought to sit down while I'm ahead, but never in my mind did I ever think I ever had a chance to be Speaker of the House. That was just something that I never thought about.
Hastert was thrust into the job in December when a much better-known successor, Bob Livingston of Louisiana, abruptly withdrew after acknowledging extramarital affairs.
99% of us were totally taken by surprise that he wasn't going to run, wasn't going to accept the speakership.
Fellow Illinois Republican Congressman Tom Ewing is a lifelong friend and Washington roommate of Dennis Hastert.
I said, Denny, you got to do this. And he says, I don't know. I don't know if I should do this or want to do this. And I said, you're the person to do this.
The 57-year-old Hastert was sworn in January, and being a man of few words, instantly exhibited an opposite persona to that of the high-profile Gingrich.
And now let's bring an end to talk, and let's get to work.
In the weeks since, the Speaker at times has had trouble getting everyone's attention.
The Speaker on the floor deserves to be heard.
Mr. Speaker, have you ever heard or read a report about yourself that didn't have low-key, quiet, behind the scenes, those kinds of things in it?
No, I think that's pretty much how I am. I don't try to be something that I'm not. I know that I sat at the leadership table with Newt Gingrich for 4 years. I'm not Newt Gingrich. I'm a different type of person. I work hard. I try to do what I think is the right things, and I do it on a day-by-day basis. You know, I was a lineman, and when I was in high school and college football, you never got a lot of glory, but you worked hard to get the job done. And, you know, I think that persona kind of follows through.
Hastert already was a member of the House leadership. quietly serving as a deputy Republican whip. But the husband and father of 2 sons often could be found on weekends back in his hometown of Yorkville, Illinois, running errands or chatting up constituents at the grocery store. Hastert served 3 terms in the Illinois legislature. He's a former high school history teacher and highly competitive coach of the wrestling team. Only in recent days has the once reluctant Speaker of the House begun to grant television interviews.
You've been in the job 5 months now. How do you think it's going?
I got a lot more gray hair. I think it's going as well as I could be expected. This is an incredible job. It's incredible opportunities, but it's also incredibly tough. We have a 5-vote majority out of 435 members. That means that we have a committee of 222 people, that we can never lose more than 5 people. If you do, you can't get the work done that you want to do. That's a tough thing to do.
Hastert already has experienced the pitfalls of leadership. Last month, he quietly cast a vote in favor of a Democratic resolution endorsing NATO's air campaign against Yugoslavia. But the overwhelming majority of his rank-and-file Republicans voted no. The influential and strongly partisan Republican whip, Tom DeLay, reportedly urged several Republicans to vote down the measure, which failed in a tie. The next day, House Democratic leader Richard Gephardt aimed his criticism directly at the new Speaker.
The Republican leadership has shown an amazing lack of leadership.
One report said you assured Mr. Gephardt easy passage.
I didn't assure anybody. We were down at the White House that day, and I said if I looked at that now, and I didn't know what the votes were going to be, and I didn't even know what bill the Democrats were going to bring up. We really didn't know what bill they're going to bring up.
Martin Frost of Texas, a member of the House Democratic leadership, echoes the charge that Hastert hasn't firmly grasped the reins of power.
He says he wants to do things, and he says he wants to be bipartisan, and yet he permits a harshly partisan individual like Tom DeLay to the House whip, the Republican whip, to call a lot of the shots, to be the public's face of the Republican Party, to be the face of the House of Representatives. If you look at Meet the Press or you look at the interview shows on the weekends, you don't see Denny Hastert, you see Tom DeLay.
Many people are suggesting very strongly that you are the de facto Speaker, that Dennis Hastert is nothing more than a puppet.
Dennis Hastert is Speaker of the House, and he is the right man for the right time. He's already proven that. He is the Speaker of the House, and I support him.
Tom DeLay, isn't running things, and they're like, there's like any political organization, there's people who like to drive wedges here and there. I worked with Tom DeLay for 4 years in the majority. Matter of fact, ran his campaign to make him the whip, and I was his chief deputy whip for 4 years. Sometimes we agree and sometimes we don't agree, but we also have a very straight policy that we talk to each other on a very straight basis. He felt very strongly about the war in Kosovo, and a little different from the way I did. He didn't change any votes on the floor, and we didn't whip it that day. So he may have expressed his opinion, but I don't think anything changed.
So Dennis Hastert is in charge.
Absolutely.
Hastert rebounded quickly in the eyes of some critics when earlier this month he stared down one of the most powerful members of Congress, Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia.
Run over me. That's all right. But tell the good Speaker that I'm not dropping anything. You vote me down. He's a Speaker. He's a mighty man.
Byrd had insisted a loan guarantee program for steel companies be added to an emergency spending bill. But Speaker Hastert convinced a handful of Republican appropriators to switch their earlier votes and reject the proposal in exchange for a later vote on the issue.
I've been assured by the Speaker that the steel guarantee loan proposal will be on the floor of the House as a freestanding bill, and as such I would vote for it. I think that's the...
Byrd relented.
This was a very important gesture by the Speaker, and it may be one of the first defining moments of his speakership.
Marshall Whitman watches Congress for the conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation.
He actually intervened with the group on Capitol Hill known as the Cardinals, the appropriators, and told them that he didn't want pork. And the reason why it was so critical is because it will set the mood for the rest of the year on spending bills, but perhaps more importantly, Denny Hastert showed who was boss on a critical issue.
A week later, Hastert stepped in and spoke up preemptively on the issue of gun control, avoiding for House Republicans the political embarrassment suffered by their Senate colleagues who were forced to reverse themselves on a gun measure.
We know it's against the federal law to purchase a handgun at a federally licensed gun store or a federally licensed pawn shop. But there are pawn shops and there are situations at gun shows with some dealers who are not licensed that it's actually legal for a person under 21 years of age to purchase a handgun. I think that's wrong.
Hastert says such a statement should not be a surprise, even though it comes from a man who, like most other Republicans, voted against major gun controls a few years ago.
This is not a major change for Dennis Hastert in terms of...
I think this is common sense. I think the American people think it's common sense to do this as well.
Hastert has a philosophy for approaching the job of House Speaker.
The best way to get something done is to get things done on time. So we got the budget on time. We've set out the parameters for a tax bill. We're trying to get the appropriation bills through the process without a lot of extra money. And we're trying to save Social Security. We're trying to improve education. We've said that we think every kid needs a good school and a safe school to go to.
But Democrats complain they too have an agenda and that Hastert is dragging his feet while the legislative clock ticks.
Every week they keep taking days off the legislative calendar. We don't work on Mondays. We don't work on Fridays. We don't come in till 6 p.m. on Tuesdays. We give away entire weeks. If they were serious about doing campaign finance reform, if they were serious about HMO reform, if they were serious about education issues, we'd be in session 5 days a week, at least 4 days a week. We're in session 2.5 days a week right now. And that doesn't give you a lot of time to do anything.
The Speaker and the Republicans have a dilemma. Because they have such a narrow majority, it's next to impossible to get bills passed unless they have the support of some Democrats. And of course, the Democrats don't want anything to pass because they don't want the Republicans to have accomplishments as they approach the year 2000. So therein lies the rub.
Examples of that dilemma occurred this week. On Wednesday, a group of conservative Republicans, worried Congress would spend too much money this year, held up consideration of a major agriculture spending bill. And yesterday, Speaker Hastert pulled from the floor a defense bill because disputes over China and Kosovo policies threatened to derail it. Nonetheless, Illinois' Tom Ewing insists Dennis Hastert has exactly the skills needed for these times.
We had him picked to be Speaker of the Illinois House 20 years ago. And then he moved to Congress, and we thought, oh, we lost one of our best candidates. The man has that talent, and it's obvious to his associates and colleagues that deal with him.
You know, it's a unique opportunity to be the Speaker of the House. Not a lot of people in the history of this country have ever been able to do it. My goal is to do the best job I can here every day and try to not disappoint the people who elected me Speaker or the American people.
Thank you for being here and giving me the opportunity to spend some time with you tonight. Thank you very much.
If anything, Speaker Hastert may be even more optimistic than those around him. He says there's a good chance Republicans and Democrats will reach a deal on Social Security and Medicare reform this year, contrary to the widespread belief in Washington.
Still to come on the NewsHour tonight, Shields and Gigot, the Templeton Prize winner, and a Roger Rosenblatt essay. Mark and Paul are with Margaret Warner.
And Mark Shields is a syndicated columnist. Paul Gigot is a columnist for the Wall Street Journal. So, Mark, what's your take on Dennis Hastert? I mean, is he just in an untenable position, or do you think someone else with different skills would be able to lead, what did he call it, a committee of 222?
Well, as I was listening to Kwame's piece, as he interviewed Speaker Hastert, I was reminded of election night, 1998, when it became apparent the Democrats, instead of losing seats, as was expected, were going to pick up House seats. I talked to one of Dick Gephardt's political lieutenants. There were still enough races unsettled that it appeared the Democrats might have a chance, a real fighting chance, of taking over control of the House. And I said, you guys could have 220 by the end of the night, at which point he said, God, I hope not. Thus meaning, you know, would be in the impossible position of trying to organize the House with 7th year of a president as well as their own party. But still, it is such a razor-thin margin Newt Gingrich, Tip O'Neill, Sam Rayburn. It is tough, and especially with independents, and especially there are real, profound, and honest differences within the Republican caucus on real issues.
Why doesn't the need for political survival make the Republicans, Paul, stick together and say, we got to get through this?
Because they each define their political survival differently. Chris Shays in New England says, what does the New York Times think about my position on campaign finance reform? Nobody, a lot of other people don't care about that. The conservatives elected in '94 say, well, we want to have spending control. The appropriators, you know, there are three parties in Congress, Democrats, Republicans, and the appropriators. Both parties, I mean, they say, this is the era of surpluses. We don't want to meet these budget caps. It's party time. We're drunken sailors again. We can spend, spend, spend. That creates these natural clashes, and it's very hard for anybody, it would be, as Mark says, for anybody to control it. And Denny Hastert, I think it's fair to say, is moving slowly to exercise his leadership. One canard, I think, that is around Washington, that I think is not true, is that somehow he is a mere mouthpiece for Tom DeLay. I don't think that's true at all. I think he is his own man, and he has a measure of respect quite apart from DeLay within the Republican conference, a measure of goodwill. What Hastert has been slow to do, I think, is to exercise his clout. And he's going to have to do that on more and more issues.
The way he did with Byrd.
Exactly.
So then
just one point.
Yeah.
Chris Shays, who is moderate from Connecticut and the leading Republican sponsor of campaign finance legislation, the McCain-Feingold counterpart in the House with Marty Meehan of Massachusetts, said this week to a group of reporters at breakfast that Tom DeLay was the most powerful member of Congress. And it just in saying that
it doesn't make Denny Hastert his mouthpiece.
No, but acknowledging that his respect for Denny Hastert and stating it quite openly, that he dealt with him honorably and all the rest of it, but that Tom DeLay was the most powerful, which is a rare. That's unique. We have had a whip who's eclipsed a speaker in that sense, and I think, you know, he came. This can't be forgotten. This is a man who Newt Gingrich left the speakership because he couldn't get reelected to speaker. I mean, he had 6 or 7 Republicans who weren't going to vote for him for re-election, which meant Dick Gephardt then could be the speaker if they honored their threat. Bob Livingston, the chairman of the appropriators, but a powerful inside player in the House, was going to be next. And except he had problems of a personal nature, which were exposed, and 10 were going to take a ride with him, take a run away from him. So he's in an awful position. The person who caused him the most trouble this week, out of conviction, is Tom Coburn of Oklahoma. Tom Coburn is a doctor from Oklahoma, a true conservative, a true believer, and he's upset with what he sees, this runaway action of Congress, that they're not being consistent with the conservative philosophy that he believes the Republican Party stood for. And Margaret, what are you going to do to Tom Coburn? Tom Coburn took the term limits pledge when he got elected, and he's leaving. What are you going to do? You're going to threaten him? You're going to tell him he's not going to have a good office next time? He's not going to be here next time. So it's a really impossible position.
I want to talk about the Shays example because I think that does illustrate part of the problem. I mean, Hastert sat down with Shays and said, you can have a vote on campaign finance in September. And Shays, and you would think that, you know, it's only 3 months away. It's a vote that he's going to get it on everybody on record. And Shays said no. He said, no, I want it before. Now, what can you do? Basically, Shays is saying, I don't trust you, Speaker Hastert, to give me that vote, or I don't trust you somehow not to work this against my interests. That's the kind of problem he has, and I guess you only build that trust over time. But when you have congressmen like that who have relatively safe seats running off in that direction, it's very hard to exert leadership.
Now, Mark, let's just shift to the Cox Commission.
Just one correction. Chris Shays on campaign finance reform is deeply concerned over one thing, and so is everybody who's for campaign finance reform. It goes to September, Margaret, then they are into appropriations bills, and it dies in the Senate. That is Mitch McConnell's plan. It is the plan of Tom DeLay. It's the plan of Trent Lott. Okay? They want to kill campaign finance. His point is that the only way that the Senate is going to deal with it is if they get it early enough, and that was the reason why. That's why 26 Republicans.
Okay, guys, we're going to shift to the Cox Commission report. Chinese spying, because that was the big thing that the Republicans were waiting for this week. What do you make of the way the Hill responded to this? What are Republicans on the Hill going to do with this?
Well, I think they're going to have some continuing oversight. They're going to pass the recommendations, which will probably pass on a bipartisan basis to improve the export controls. They're going to have some continuing investigation, I think, of the way this was, the espionage charges, the espionage news was pursued by the administration. For example, Janet Reno was up defending her department's failure to issue a wiretap on one of the alleged spies once they had word for it. I think news of it. That's the way they're going to go. I think the bigger meaning of this, though, is not in Congress so much, it's in the presidential campaign. And it's going to be, I think, the Cox report really blew a hole through the strategic partnership policy of the Clinton administration. And you're going to see the Republican presidential candidates make China and U.S. relations with China and the security issue with China a centerpiece of their foreign policy attack on the Clinton-Gore administration.
Do you see it that way in terms of the political fallout?
I think there's a more immediate political fallout. I think you can say so long to World Trade Organization. I don't think anybody's going to vote for that right now. And I think fast track is trade authority is very much on the back of all back burners.
But what about in terms of China's most favored nation status?
China most favored nation status will go through. But it'll just be a year. I mean, it won't get the permanent extension, and because nobody wants to vote for China right now. Paul's right. It's moved to a political issue in this sense, but it's a problem for the Republicans. It's a problem for the Republicans because two things. In the report itself, there was no connection made on the campaign money that was given by the Chinese to the Democrats in 1996. They couldn't establish this connection in the Cox report. That disappointed a lot of Republicans. And a lot of Republicans were disappointed that there wasn't more raw meat in there. And Chris Cox got some grumbling on this, the chairman for that matter. The problem is this, is it moves into a public political issue. The basic money in China doesn't come from China. It comes from multinational corporations who want total engagement, who want total trade, who want total openness to the Chinese markets and all of that, and want basically an administration that's uncritical of China and what China is doing to its own people or might not be doing in the trade business. So that's where it's going to be. The tension point is going to be between the backers, benefactors, contributors to the Republican Party and to the Democrats. Make no mistake about it. They were lined up on Democratic Commerce Secretary's planes to go over there as well, rather than the voters, Republican voters. I think Paul's absolutely right. They are angry and they're upset.
My turn to issue a correction. I think Chris Cox, the reason he didn't get to the campaign finance link was that was the concession he had to make to the Democrats to make it bipartisan. He said, we're going to focus on the security aspects. That doesn't mean that the Republicans elsewhere aren't going to be making those connections or trying to make those connections, and drawing inferences. The other thing on the business community, Bill Clinton has had a benefit in his China policy for, I think, 6 years because he's been able to separate the business community from the security issue and the security hawks in the Republican Party. What I think the Cox report does, and the failure of the president to when the president walked away from the World Trade Agreement a month ago, this shows a lot of the business people that if you're not credible on security, you can't sell a trade agreement. And I think that's going to reunite a lot of the criticism of the business community with some of the security people and give even George Bush and some of the moderates on China, if you will, a chance to make a case against the administration.
Do you think anyone, Mark, in the administration is going to lose their job over this? I mean, there have been a lot of members of Congress calling for Attorney General Reno to resign or be fired, for Sandy Berger to resign or be fired, and he said on the show last night to Jim he didn't plan to do that. Are you?
Yeah, I think that's Sandy Berger right now.
He's
not gone. He's staying, and that's Janet Reno on the other line. No, I don't think right now that certainly has been either in a pattern or a tradition in this administration of people leaving either over principle or under a cloud. But I think one of the surprises, Margaret, has been that there hasn't been a greater fallout on this China, on the Cox report.
You mean a sort of concerted...
There really hasn't been that sense of a fire and outrage and uproar. It really is. It is surprising. It comes back.
Because it's a serious report.
It's a serious report, and one Democrat said to me this week, he said, he said, we've had an awful week. He said, the president's poll numbers are down. Kosovo is not going well. I mean, you name it, things aren't, the China report comes out, and yet what's the bad story going into the holiday weekend and the recess of all next week is that the Republicans are in disarray. They couldn't pass an appropriations bill for legislative appropriations. They had to adjourn the House early, and the Speaker has given interviews saying, I'm in charge and Tom DeLay isn't. So, I mean, in a strange way, the story is that it wasn't a bigger story.
Inside baseball, mostly on appropriations. That's not that big a story. The reason there's not a bigger story, and the people and the administration managers is the incredible, astonishing discipline of the Democrats. I mean, if only Republicans are calling for people to resign, it's not going to happen. When Bob Torricelli said on one of the Sunday shows that he thought Janet Reno should think about resigning, he went back to the Democratic caucus on Tuesday, and I'm told he had a very rough time with it, because they said, you can't do that. You can't open this up to Republicans' attack. That just validates the Republican themes. He said, wait a minute, sometimes you have to tell the truth. And if she
Torricelli said that.
Yes. And if you haven't done your job, then that's, then we have to speak up. So, I mean, it's the Democrats who are sticking by the administration in this one, as they have on so many others.
All right, we have to leave it there. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Next, a prize-winning merger of science and religion, and to Elizabeth Farnsworth in San Francisco.
The Templeton Prize for Progress in Religion is given each year to an individual who, in the official wording, has shown extraordinary originality advancing the world's understanding of God and/or spirituality. John Marks Templeton, who founded several investment funds, established the prize in 1972. Its first recipient was Mother Teresa. This year, the prize went to physicist and theologian Ian Barber. He was cited for pioneering a framework for discussing scientific issues with significant moral and ethical implications. Barber is professor emeritus at Carleton College in Minnesota and has written or edited a dozen books, including Issues in Science and Religion. Congratulations, Professor Barber, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me on.
You got a PhD in physics at the University of Chicago. You studied under the physicist who had carried out the first atomic chain reaction, as I understand it, Enrico Fermi. And then a few years later, you went to Yale and got a divinity degree. Why? What drives this interest in both fields?
Well, after I'd been teaching physics for a few years, I felt the need to study ethics and theology to look at some of the issues that had come out of science. And after I got a second degree at Yale, Carleton College offered me a joint appointment, half-time in physics and half-time in the religion department. So I think it started as a sort of personal quest to integrate these two halves of my own life. And as I got into writing, I found other people were quite interested in these issues. And there's been a growing interest, I think. The popular image is of science and religion in conflict or in warfare. The atheistic scientist on the one hand and the creationist or biblical literalist on the other. One believes in evolution but not God. The other believes in God but not evolution. But what about the people in between who believe in God and evolution, or who see evolution as God's way of creating? So that's the area that I've been exploring, and there are a significant number of scientists. There was a
Excuse me 1 minute. You said that interest in it is growing. Why is it growing? It's on the cover of magazines. I noticed it's been on Newsweek, on U.S. News and World Report, the interest in the dialogue between the two. The American Association of the Advancement for Science has a special office devoted to this dialogue. Why? Is it because of changes in science?
No, I think it's more attitudes towards science. I think scientists are more aware of the limitations of their specialized disciplines. Their disciplines raise boundary questions. They raise ethical questions that science doesn't itself answer. And I think, at the other hand, theologians are more aware of the need to reformulate ideas, particularly ideas of God and of human nature, in the light of science, so that this opens up at least some humility, some recognition that no discipline has all the answers.
Let's start with one of the scientific discoveries that seems to have opened up a new room for religious discussion with scientists, and that's these discoveries that come out regularly in cosmology about the Big Bang and the expansion of the universe. Am I right to believe that it's opened more talking between the two disciplines?
I think it has.
And why? Why?
I think because, again, questions are raised that are sort of at the boundary of science. You don't need to raise religious questions when you're doing your daily scientific work. But when you ask where it fits into a larger framework, as you press back in time to a beginning, the Big Bang, which we thought was 15 billion years ago. I think a couple of weeks ago, NASA said the evidence points more towards 12 billion years. But what happened at t equals 0?
You mean when time equals 0 and all this? In other words,
that's sort of the singularity at which the laws of physics break down. And the question, why is there a universe at all? Why does it have the kind of order that it has? And particularly, why are the constants so finely tuned that life is possible? You know, Hawkins said that if the force of gravity were smaller by 1 part in 1,000 million, the universe would have collapsed before it had time for planets and galaxies to form, for the heavy elements to form. If it had been just a fraction lower, it would have expanded too rapidly for matter to coalesce. So that's the kind of question that I think is raised by science, but not answered by science. Is there a kind of design there? At least the idea of a beginning. Now, of course, you can say it's all chance, and the atheist scientist tends to say, well, there may be billions of universes, not just billions of galaxies, but billions of universes. We just happen to live in one in which all these constants come out right. Well, I think that's a possible answer. It's not scientifically verifiable because there's no communication among these galaxies. But I think this kind of I think there is a greater humility on the scientific side.
You've written a lot about technology. Do you think that religion has an important role to play right now with the technological issues, with the ethical issues raised by technology, like cloning, for example?
Yes, I think scientists are more likely to recognize today that the applications of science raise ethical issues that their own discipline cannot answer. Science can tell you what's possible, but it can't tell you what's desirable, what one should do. And cloning is a good example. It's fine to think about cloning Dolly the sheep for medical purposes, but when you talk about cloning human beings, then it becomes more dubious. What are the motives? A father might want a son exactly like himself, or a mother might want to replace a child that's died, or supply organs for a child with a disease. But I think that's using people for other purposes rather than valuing them in themselves. And I don't think the biblical tradition gives you a neat answer. I mean, there's no verse in the Bible that says, thou shalt not clone, or thou shalt clone. It's a new problem, never faced before. And I think in that kind of issue, the biblical tradition does hold up the value of the individual, the family. The family is kind of broken up by if a father's clone is both a son in a different generation and a twin, this and no woman is involved in the genetic heritage, the whole family structure is more severely threatened than any other reproductive technology. And I think that raises questions in which the religious community and the scientific community and the public in general needs to get involved, because that's a problem that science itself doesn't answer. It's the question of what contributes to human welfare, what contributes to human justice.
Are there dangers here? After all, it took centuries for science and religion to separate, and for superstition not to block scientific progress. Aren't there dangers if science and religion become too close again?
There are dangers if the scientist claims to answer questions that are not really scientific ones, and that's certainly been the cause of conflict in the past, or when the religious person is outside of their territory and gets into making scientific pronouncements. But I think if each recognizes their limitations and is open to the other and to the need to reformulate the ideas, I find theologians are rethinking the concept of God in an evolutionary world, the concept of human nature. And I think this is a challenge as one faces the new millennium. How can we guide technology towards human betterment?
Your prize, the Templeton Prize, is $1.2 million. What will you do with it?
Well, I've given $1 million to the Center for Theology and Natural Sciences in Berkeley, California, a center that has been promoting this dialogue between scientists and theologians. This is to be an endowment to help them carry on their work.
Well, thank you so much, and congratulations again.
Thank you.
And speaking of human nature, finally tonight, essayist Roger Rosenblatt considers the reactions to two recent tragedies.
People are said to show their true and surprising colors when calamity occurs, but I've never believed it. I think that people are who they are in normal states of repose, and that calamity more often distorts character than reveals it. Yet the events in Littleton, Colorado, and Oklahoma City suggest that people can, in fact, remain constant, calamity or no calamity, and that when something goes terribly wrong, it only makes clear who they've been all along. What was heartening in the otherwise heartbreaking news from Littleton and Oklahoma City was that most people are decent, intelligent, fair-minded, sympathetic, generous to others, equipped with a perspective that allows them to grasp the larger pictures, in short, altogether okay. Nearly everyone who came into view as a result of the Littleton killings was hugely impressive. The parents of the families of victims of the killings were brave and clear-headed inside their visible, unbearable pain.
It is time for change, and it's time for the NRA and us to change our agenda. Thank you very much.
The father of Daniel Mauser, one of the boys killed, spoke forcefully at a protest rally against the NRA meeting in Denver, but without unreasonable passion. And when he later appeared on TV, his anger was wholly rational. He made a meticulous distinction between what he felt was the NRA's indirect responsibility for the killings and anything more heated. He spoke of giving fair and judicious treatment to the man who sold the killers one of their guns. Similarly, the family of Rachel Joy Scott appeared and spoke both grimly and sympathetically of the parents of the killers. And Rachel's younger brother Craig appeared with Michael Scholes, father of another murdered boy, Isaiah, each holding on to the other in gestures of quiet, mutual kindness. In Oklahoma City, there was more of the same after the tornado. People who had not lost their houses were shown taking in those who did. People who had lost everything spoke with a normal mixture of shock, sorrow, and resignation. A man who had been carried 400 yards by the winds was level-headedly grateful to be alive. Another, who had been caught in the Oklahoma City federal building bombing, refused to make an easy melodramatic statement about irony or fate. Those in hospitals and whose children were also hospitalized spoke warily, quite sensibly afraid of starting over. Those who had lost family spoke humanly of grief. One would wish, of course, that no disasters occurred to bring these people and their private lives before the country's attention. And it's often unseemly that people are able to discuss their troubles before a camera so readily. Yet in these cases, more was revealed than mere familiarity with television. Exposed by devastation, these people were witnesses to the stronger stuff of the species. External nature and the darkest holes of human nature had brought them forward where better natures prevailed. They were not, as usually happens, broken down into categories that bear simple-minded expectations. When people are shown as members of striking unions, political parties, ethnic groups, and so forth, they behave as special interests. Women for women, policemen for policemen, victims for victims, and on and on. But here, in these two great sadnesses, people simply behaved like people. Moderate in judgment, giving in attitude, sensible when nothing around them made any sense. The rap against people generally as evolving animals is that we have yet to learn to get along in groups. It's evident in wars and riots. It's evident at soccer games. But once in a while, it is encouraging to see that we may have a promising foundation for our evolution after all.
Columbine, flower bloom, tenderly I sing to you.
Hell in two places caused people to respond with clarity and strength, which qualities could not have shown had they not been there all along. In the days before the boy killers opened fire, and when Oklahoma City was as quiet as a mine.
Peace will come to you in time, Columbine, friend of mine.
I'm Roger Rosenblatt.
Again, the major stories of this Friday. The Commerce Department reported consumer spending was up last month, while saving was the lowest on record. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed up 92 points at 10,559. And in Belgrade, Russia's special Kosovo envoy presented Yugoslav President Milosevic with a peace plan, and Allied airstrikes were the heaviest yet. We'll see you online and again here Monday evening. Have a nice Memorial Day weekend. I'm Jim Lara. Thank you and good night.
Brought to you in part by ADM. Feeding the world is the biggest challenge of the new century. In 50 years, the world must have room at the table for 10 billion people. We're setting new places every day. ADM, supermarket to the world. And by Solomon Smith Barney.
Is an arthritis cure around the corner? One thing's for sure, opportunities abound. Let's get to work. Solomon Smith Barney.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
On tomorrow's Weekend Edition, it's breaking news, in-depth interviews, political analysis, and maybe even a few laughs. Join us for Weekend Edition from 5 to 10 a.m. on OPB Radio.
Video cassettes of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer are available from PBS Video. Call 1-800-328-PBS-1.
This is PBS.
Funding for local broadcast of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by viewers like you and by the following. Davis Wright Tremaine, lawyers to the business community and individuals, with 13 offices worldwide. Portland Nursery, a passion for plants, a nursery for plant people, at 50th and Stark and 90th and Division.
To General Eisenhower, the most important weapons of World War II weren't guns or bombs. They were 4 vehicles that moved the troops and kept them supplied. The C-47 transport plane, the landing craft, the 2.5-ton truck, and the bulldozer. Find out how the internal combustion engine changed the face of warfare on The Machines That Won the War.
On OPB, Saturday at 8.
The National Memorial Day Concert.
Captured forever in my mind the image of your final hug.
And I saw more men killed there than I'd like to remember.
Each one of them was someone's precious child, someone's shining star.
Join us as we honor their sacrifice with me, Ossie Davis, Colin Powell, Aaron Neville, Charles Dearney, Rita Moreno, and Judd Hirsch.
On OPB, Sunday at 8. Funding for local broadcast of this program has been provided by viewers like you and by the following.
An hour.